And Kent might have been in the theater about 5 years ago or more. So it certainly has evolved and grown over time, so I appreciate that. What we're going to go through, similar to past years, is a little bit about corn and soybean markets, a little bit of what I see going on. We've had a little bit of extra volatility this week, today included, that continues to have some political drivers behind price action, and I think that's one of the newer pieces in the marketplace that is playing a lot larger role than we're used to, and that goes all the way back to last spring and the trade war and China and the tariffs and what that did to beans and how that's interplayed with prices has been a bit of a challenge this year. There's no question that you can have the best fundamentals in the world, you can have some of the best practices in the world, and that still doesn't mean you don't get thrown off guard by some things. And this political environment that we're in is very, very hard to track. It's very hard to know what the next tweet's going to be. It's very hard to know what the next headline's going to be. And as it relates to agriculture, it has an impact. And so it feels like this trade war with China that we find ourselves in, the agricultural industry is kind of the whipping post of this trade war. I think that's a fair assessment of it. The battlefield, I think, is somewhere else outside of agriculture, but certainly directly through tariffs and then indirectly just through the lobbying of headlines back and forth between the two countries has really played a role in making this year's marketing a bit difficult. So with that backdrop, I'm going to get into corn here a little bit. First, we'll go to beans. I'm going to try to be pretty quick. If you do have any questions, please just holler them out. I know a lot of times with a bigger group, somebody that maybe doesn't want to holler out a question, but if I'm going through something and you need a little more clarification or a follow-up, just holler it out right then and there. We'll address it. Certainly, if you want to wait till the end, that's fine too. So anyway, starting with corn real quick. This is going to be probably harder to see than what you have in front of you. So I won't really spend a lot of time trying to point to the screen. Maybe just point your eyes to the page that's in front of you a little bit. But when we look at corn, every economist, every analyst in this business is going to put together an S&D. This is very simply the USDA supply demand report. It goes back to November because we had our December. I'm sorry, because we haven't had the one in January. We shut down. That's a whole other issue. But the supply demand for corn is actually a bit supportive. When you look at the lower right-hand corner of that sheet in front of you, and you see that 11.9% that's in that box, that's the stocks-to-use ratio. That means the ending stocks as a percent of total use or total demand is 11.9%. The smaller that number gets, the tighter the balance sheet is. The larger that number gets, the more bearish or the more burdensome those stocks are. And if you wanted to focus on one number every year, that kind of gives us an indication of price range of that number. And if you look at the previous 4 years to the left, you're going to see that we are the tightest we've been in the last 5 years. So if we think about that for a minute, the last 5 years, we've really been in a narrow trading range for corn. Broadly speaking, I've got a slide towards the very end that's going to kind of pull this all together. But we've been in a very narrow range where we spend very little time in the fours, very little time below 340, and about 80 to 85% of our time in the 355 to 385 range. That's where we've spent most of our time in the last 5 years. Now, with us having the tightest balance sheet in the United States anyway, for the last 5 years, we are trending up on the upper side of that range, but that's only, again, that's only saying maybe 10 to 15 cents, maybe 20 cents above last year. We're not talking about 50 cents. We're not talking about $1. We're talking about 20 cents or so above maybe the 5-year average for this time of year for the last 5 years. So we are tighter, but it's not really translating into anything material when it comes to price. So that's just the backdrop of the supply demand for corn. I will say, if you look at that very far left-hand column, the 2.45 billion bushels, the 2450 that's there, that's exports. If we do that, that's a record. That would be a record for exports out of this country. The previous record was 2.43 billion bushels, which was made in 1979. So we have not had a record in corn exports for a very long time. We're right on the bubble. We're doing it this year. We really won't know if we're going to achieve a record or not until we get to July and August. But we're looking pretty good, pretty strong out of the gates with corn exports. So I think that's a real strong positive number. When you look at the ethanol usage number, which is that 5.6 billion bushels. That's the one that makes me a bit nervous. I've got another slide that I'll just skip when I get to the point, so I'll address a little bit of the ethanol right now. Ethanol margins for the last 2 months have been the worst ever, really. When you look at it in terms of net profitability per gallon, we've gotten down to a negative 15, 16 cents a gallon loss on an EBITDA basis for ethanol. That's the worst we've been. So ethanol has seen some plants close. Most of those plants have been in the periphery of the Corn Belt. So we've had a plant close in Virginia. We've had a plant close in Pennsylvania. We've had a plant close in Texas. We've had one close in Nebraska, but that was a pretty old plant. But we've had also several plants slow down as a result of those negative margins. Now, so far, the impact of corn demand has been relatively muted. The problem is we don't know what January looked like. We don't know what February is going to look like. And we may not if we don't have some of these government reports coming out. Excuse me. So, ethanol demand is in the neighborhood of 2.5 times the size of exports. We're in an export market in this part of the country, even though there is ethanol around. The basis in this area is more largely determined by how strong the export market is day in and day out for the barge market. So when we think about ethanol, we've already lost around 50 million bushels of demand because of those plant slowdowns. We're not going to get that back. We may lose another 50 million in the next couple of months if we don't see margins improve a little bit. So one of the more bearish sides of this balance sheet is ethanol demand, and we may be knocking that number down a little bit as we go throughout the year if these margins don't improve. So that's one of the more negative sides of ethanol, of corn. This is a simple yield chart. All of you guys have seen this. The point that I like to make with this one is we did achieve the 5th year in a row of above trend line yields. They're not 5 records in a row, but they are 5 of the largest crops that we've ever produced in the last 5 years. They weren't consecutive records, but they are. It is an impressive trend. And I think one of the things, when I think about marketing, and when I think about how to price these corn crops in the coming years, one of the things we need to think about is looking at the last 5 years and the last 5 years price action based on the yields that we've had, looking to the next year to be more similar to the last 5 and trying to think it's going to be different is probably a good approach. Don't approach the next marketing year saying, well, we've had 5 really good crop years in a row from a national average yield perspective. We're due for a bad one. And because we're due, I'm going to make my marketing decisions based upon we're due for bad weather. I would rather take the opposite approach and say it's much more likely we're going to have another year similar to the last 5, and when to be aggressive and when to see some of the highs that we've seen in the last 5 years, which is in the low 4s, to really lock in a lot of my forward production when it comes to that. I think agronomy, I think the seed, I think various practices, precision farming, variable rate planting, variable rate fertilizer, all the things that you guys know really, really well and do very, very well. It's not my area of expertise, but I think a lot of that has created a lot of insurance and a lot of insulation around Mother Nature. Not to say Mother Nature doesn't have a lot to say with the final yield. We've had pretty decent weather, but I also believe for some of the modest ups and downs that we've had these last few years, I continue to be pretty amazed at how big of a corn crop we can grow in average weather conditions. And I think that's much more the norm than the anomaly. So that's that. Looking to this next slide, this is just changing corn production state over state, or year over year by state. You look at Missouri, 67 million bushels less corn in Missouri than last year. Illinois on the other side of the river, 78 million bushels more corn than last year. So that's how you read that chart. I have a red box drawn around the Dakotas, northern Iowa, and Minnesota. And the reason I have that box there is in our client base, we work with about 210 elevators and ethanol plants and feed mills across the Midwest. We have in the neighborhood of 40 that are inside that red box. We don't have a single client in that red box that says their yield was within 5% of last year. They're all 6-7% down to 15% worse than last year. The USDA has the yields inside that red box within 5% of last year, or higher in the case of South Dakota. I bring that up because when we have the quarterly stocks report, which was supposed to happen last Friday, I have no idea what date that's going to happen on because of the fine folks in Washington, but we feel that there's still room for production to come down for this old crop year. That first quarter stocks report is one of the most important numbers of the year, so it's really quite a shame that we're still going to wait on that number until we have government open, and it's probably going to be about a week after that we're going to see that report. It's typically one of the biggest reports of the year. It says, really, have we accurately looked at yield, and have we accurately looked at production based on stocks surveys, and then also the supply demand that goes with it. So on one hand, we can get a little bit more friendly corn based on a smaller production number if we're right, that northwestern quadrant in the Corn Belt is a little bit lower than we think with production, offset potentially by a little lower ethanol number. But at the end of the day, if you look at the ending stocks number, we feel like that's pretty comfortable, or maybe even a little lower going forward because of that production. So we feel pretty good about corn as far as its price range and then some of its potential to come to the upside based on that. But again, we got to see that number to see if our hunch is right. World stocks. I have this slide and the next slide. They really go together. And the point that I'm making with these next two slides is how distorting China is. And then if you take out that distortion, just how tight we are with world corn stocks. So if you look at this, the green bars on the right-hand side, that shows world corn stocks. The yellowish colored line is the world stocks to use ratio. And that looks like we've really expanded that in the last 5 years, which we have, from the world numbers, including China. And the key to think about with this slide is it includes China stocks. No one in China, nor in the USDA, nor in this country have any clue how much corn is in China. We can talk about it, we can guess about it, we can make some assumptions based on what they say, but the fact of the matter is they don't know immediately how much corn they have in that country at any one given time. So the next slide, which is what we've done, we've taken corn stocks minus China for the world, which is this next slide. And it's important for people to know, according to the USDA, which is just using Chinese data, 2/3 of the entire world's ending stocks for corn is in China, according to these numbers, according to the USDA. Those numbers that we get from China are based off of estimates of production that are backed up by a census that happens every 10 years. So that's like us doing a quarterly stocks report, but only doing it once every 10 years. They really don't have much of a clue. And to prove that they don't have much of a clue, their last 10-year census data came out this past November. It was done through 2017. The data was released in China in April. It was released to us in November in the USDA. And over the course of 7 years, the past 7 years, China made adjustments to their production of over 5.8 billion bushels based on that census data. They basically said we grew a lot more than we thought we did, but we're also using a lot more than we thought we were based on this census data. So to put that another way, here's the change in China corn stocks in that red shaded area. And you see that 5.8 billion bushels. To put it into perspective, 2 billion bushels is a pretty adequate corn stocks number for the United States. And we're the #1 producer in the world. China is the #2 producer in the world, and they adjusted previous production by 5.8 billion bushels. It is a huge number. It's a huge distortion to the market, and it's one that I really question a lot of the data that comes from China anyway as being pretty suspect. And I like to take the opportunity when I see these types of data points come out to say, what is China doing as opposed to what is China saying? And this is the perfect opportunity to prove this point. Even today, it's a very perfect opportunity. Over the past 5 years, on average, China imports 2 million tons of corn, which is not that much. That's 80 million bushels. They buy that from the Ukraine every year. It's an exchange corn for natural gas. It's this commodity swap that they've been doing for years because the Ukraine, from an energy standpoint, is broke. So when it comes to imports, they import that 2 million tons. They're the second largest producer and the second largest user in the world. What have they done this year? What's China done on corn this year since our new crop started on September 1st? They've already bought 2.5 million tons, and we're not even halfway through the year yet from the Ukraine, which they typically do. One of the rumors that went through the market today was them buying wheat and corn from the United States. We're not really going to be able to verify that because we're not going to see the sales data that will have China on it until we have the government open and reporting that data. But that was one of those rumors today that kind of pushed the market up 6 cents or so and wheat up more than that. So if you are a country that just came out this year and said, oh, by the way, our stocks are 5.8 billion bushels more than we said they were just a couple of months ago, but at the same time, I'm turning around buying more corn in the first 6 months of our marketing year than I have in the past 5 years. That's saying one thing and that's doing another. And that's really the point I want to make with China. If I think there's an unknown in the market, if there's something bullish that could happen on corn that's not Mother Nature related, it's not ethanol, it's really not even general exports, even though those are quite strong around the world, and they have been. The unknown is if we actually see China come to the United States to buy a few million tons of U.S. corn. The market's not expecting that. You get a price response when something happens in the market it's not expected. So if we do truly see China coming to the U.S. to buy corn, that could be worth that 10, 15, 20 cent bump in corn that I think a lot of folks in this room and in every single producer room across the country would like to see happen as a way to let go of some old crop stocks at a little bit better values than what we see today. So if those rumors do pan out, that is one of the real short-term positives that we could have evolving in the corn market. This is showing exports as a trend to the world. This is not a China slide. This is a world corn import slide. And you see the growth in exports and import trade. It continues to be strong, continues to be a bright spot. But for the United States, we got to remember exports only account for about 20% of what our production is. So even though it's strong, it's strong in a slice of the pie that's one of the smaller slices as far as where does the U.S. corn wind up. More of it winds up in feed and ethanol by a pretty significant margin. But it is a positive trend for demand on corn. Similar slide, this has to do with exports as well. The red line shows world trade, and the bottom three different colors show who is supplying that corn. It's the United States, it's South America, and it's the Ukraine. The point that I want to make about the Ukraine, which is that bottom purple line, you go prior to 2008, Ukraine sold no corn to the world. They were either a net importer or self-sufficient for some of those years. They were not an exporter. And this year we're looking at somewhere around 32 to 35 million tons, which is 1.2 to 1.4 billion bushels that they're going to export just 10 years later, just 10 years into their export growth. So the Ukraine has become one of the more formidable competitors for us and South America for corn, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I see them continuing to be quite aggressive. The Ukraine had a record crop this year by 20%. Not just 20 bushels, 20%. They grew 20% more corn this year than they ever have. So that's certainly weighing on how much can we actually get done, towards our record, if possible, on corn exports. Corn ethanol slide. I already kind of gone through corn ethanol, so I won't go through the margin part of this. I will take the opportunity now to address E15. E15 comes up as a question in most of these meetings. If I don't cover it first, is E15 is a good thing for corn demand. So I don't want to pour cold water on something that we have no business pouring cold water on. However, E15 and the change that happened in the EPA or I should say the change that we believe is going to happen in the EPA because it's got to get fully approved, is that we will be able to sell E15 year-round, whereas in the past, there were 3 months out of the year E15 was not able to be sold in the Midwest in the summer months because of something called a 1 pound reed vapor pressure barrier. And so we need to have that waiver. And for that waiver to happen, the EPA has not granted that waiver in the summer months. And that meant that if you offered E15 in the months of June, July, and August, you had to take it out. And so that was a real hindrance to gas stations making the investment to offer E15 because they couldn't offer it year-round. Why do I want to play that game of being only able to offer it 9 months instead of 12? So this EPA change is meant to take away that issue and allow E15 to be sold year round, more E15 stations, more E15 pumps, especially when ethanol is cheaper than gasoline. Today, roughly, ethanol is the same price as gasoline, so we're not going to see a lot of that change at this price structure. The point I want to make is when we were growing ethanol rapidly from 2006 to 2013, when we were going to E10, that was because that was the law. It had to be done. You had to get to E10 by 2013. We don't have any law that says we have to get to E15. It's only going to happen if the economics suggest that you can buy E15 a little cheaper, and then if those who are buying gasoline buy E15 because it's cheaper. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg game, but if you come up to a pump and you got E10 at 78% or 87 octane, you got E15 at 89 octane, and maybe you have a premium, and the cheapest thing on that pump is E15, most people will likely go for the E15. That's a good thing for the ethanol industry. We're not there yet. We're there in a few stations, but we're not there yet. And I think this EPA change has cleared the way for that to happen as long as E15 stays cheaper than gasoline. So it's a good thing, but it's not some savior to ethanol that some may portray it to be. The last slide I have on corn before we switch to beans here real quick, it really is meant to kind of summarize where we view prices and where I view prices for the next old crop time frame and then getting into new crop. So I want to make sure that I explain this chart correctly because it is a bit busy. We like to look at crop years and look back in history and see when have we had crop years similar to this one. And when we say similar, we look at some key characteristics. We look at that stocks-to-use ratio. We saw on the very first slide, that was 11.9%. We also look at years in which production is below usage, which means that we're decreasing ending stocks. And we also look at trendline yield as another example for putting them into similar categories. Going back to 1988, which is the far left side of that table, there have been 8 years that fit the criteria of this year, meaning that it's below 12% stocks to use, production below usage, and above trendline yields. So when we look at those 8 years, I'm going to kick out one of them, which is 2012. I'm going to kick out 2012 because it's a major drought year. Major drought years have very different pricing characteristics. When we have major real droughts, those droughts that happen approximately 1 in 20 years, we make highs really early in major drought years. So that is, in 1983, we made our high, I believe, in August. In 1988, we made our high in July. In 2012, we made our high in August for that crop year, before we even harvested the crop. We really price in a bad crop. Once we get into harvest, generally it's not as bad as we think and prices come down. So I took out 2012 for that reason. So I'm left with 7 years, and what we're doing is we're trying to see how high can July corn get. I'm looking at July corn for old crop. How high can July corn get in relationship to its January 1st price? So we just had the January 1st price a few weeks back. And as a percentage in these other 7 years, how high was the high for July corn? On average, it was 22% higher. And when you take 22% higher for this year's January price, you come up with 462. Now, I've done 22 or 23 of these meetings in the last couple of months, and I know when you all leave the room here today, you're going to remember exactly one thing, and that is, I think I said 462. So you heard it here first. And I know Scott, Meyer, and Tim, they've got like an order book this long from last night of orders of 461 and 3/4. So, no. Do I believe we're going to hit 462? No, I do not. I'm not going to argue with math. Math is very simple. It's black and white, and it is what it is. But I don't believe, knowing what we know today, that 462 is a reasonable price of it. In our mind, being able to get to 410, 415, or 420 on July is a pretty good goal, pretty good target for old crop corn. We hit a high last week of 399.5, and I think we're within a couple of cents today of $4 after today's rally. So I'm not talking about a big rally. I think we could do 15, 20 cents better than we are now, but I would be very aggressive in those at that level. And remember, this is the absolute high that this is. This is not a range. This is the absolute high of what the average of the last 7 times we've been in this category. But I will point out, one of those years was like 1996. 1996, we rallied 51% above the January 1 price, which would be over $1.60 so, or $1.70 so above where we are today if we use that as a proxy year. But what happened in 1996? Anybody remember? What was the big thing that drove 1996 corn to $5? China bought U.S. corn. That was that year. What did I talk about just a second ago? China buying U.S. corn. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not. So if we see China coming in and buying 4 or 5 million tons of corn from the United States, then I will get a little bit more on board with a higher number than just 420 type of range. But anyway, that's the old crop numbers. If we see July corn get into that 415, 420 range, East corn maybe 425 or 430 is probably the high. You think about the last 5 years, what's been the highest East corn price we've seen in 5 years? It's 449.5. Every one of you that had 450 offers and didn't get it filled. 449.5 was, I think, 2 summers ago, maybe 3. It happened in, I think, really early July, maybe late June. That's the highest we've had in 5 years. We do have the tightest balance sheet presently in the last 5 years, so we can't rule out that kind of a number. But I think we have to have a little extra help from Mother Nature in May and June. And I think we also need to see an acreage number on the March 31st acreage report that is not exceptionally large. And I'll define that as something that is 93 million acres or higher as exceptionally large. When we talk about the low side of corn for old crop and new crop, the low that we've had was 318 in September of 2016. That low occurred in 2016 when we had 94 million acres and a trendline yield above a trendline yield. And I'm fearful, I don't know this for a fact, obviously nobody does, but I'm fearful the amount of acres that we're going to increase coming into this spring may get us close to that 93 or 94 million acre number again. And if we do, it's going to be really hard to rally corn with that extra 4 to 5 million acres because we're adding approximately 750 million bushels of corn onto an ending stocks number. That is already 1.7. That gets us right back to 2.4, which is where we were at in 2016 when we made that low. So lot's going to be said about our ability to get into the mid $4 range, if that's even in the possibility with Mother Nature at all. We're going to say a lot about our ability to do that with our acreage number on March 31st, assuming we have a functioning government on March 31st. So that's a big deal. That's a big report. It's going to be more important this year than it has been in the past few years. Moving on to beans. Any corn questions before I have a natural break here? Switching to beans.
Brian?
Yes, sir.
If you do have 93 or 94 million acres of corn, where's your price parameters in? You mentioned what was earlier. Shorter acres, what do you think it would be if you do have 93, 94, or even more acres?
If we have 93 or 94, the high that we make prior to that report, let's just say before March 31st, so between now and then, let's say these corn gets to 410. Right now we've struggled to get above 405. Let's say we get to 410 just for picking a number. If we come out with a 94 on March 31st, we're going to have one heck of a weather issue brewing to even take out the high before that report. That's a big number.
Will you folks be aggressive in pricing before March?
Excellent question. And right now we are just over 20% priced in our 2-year program. One of the, and again, I've kind of got some of this as we finish up. One of the things that we're definitely changing about our pricing program is looking at the ranges of the last 5 years and recognizing a little bit more clearly how rare $4 is. And I have some numbers on that in the last slide for the night. But how rare $4 is and how far ahead sometimes we have to do to sell it. The big mistake that we made this year, in this year's old crop fall and winter, was made in May this past summer. And that was underestimating the effect of this trade war and its impact on corn. We thought it would impact beans pretty prevalently, and we sold all of our beans in May, and that was the right thing to do. We should have done all of our corn at the same time. That was the mistake that we made this year. And we had offers in literally 5 to 7 cents above where we got, and that still irks me. But that's the mistake that we made. Generally speaking, the broader approach that we're taking this year in both 1-year and 2-year programs is to be more aggressive early, because we are seeing this $4 opportunity now. We do have a 403 D's corn today. We do have a 412 or 413 D's 20 corn today. So the ability to sell that now, we're grabbing more and more of that all the time. If we clear 405 tomorrow, let's say, we're going to be 40% sold for 2-year corn. If we clear 409, which we already have offers, then we'll be 60% sold. And my goal is to be 60% sold before that acreage report. If it is as bearish as it may be, we've got 60%. We might be able to buy back 30 cents cheaper and put that in our pocket and wait for the weather. So to answer your question, our general game plan is to be much more aggressive earlier than we have been. We waited way too long with way too much of a percentage this year, and it's really because corn was going nowhere. There wasn't a detriment to waiting, but there wasn't a benefit, so we waited a lot till the end, which I know looks bad. This year's corn program was our most difficult year we've had in 5 years, but we are kind of shaping our thoughts quite a bit differently this year, wanting to be more forward sellers. So I think that answers your question. Beans. I'm going to switch to beans here real quick. Beans, on about any number you want to look at, any fundamental metrics you want to look at, any spreadsheet you want to build, beans are ugly. They're as ugly as they've ever been. So beans right now, we've got a 23.3% stocks to use ratio. That's the highest ever in the United States by a long ways. Compare that to the 4 years to the left of those red numbers, 4.95, 7.2, 10.2, and then we're skyrocketing to 23.3. There's a lot of folks that wonder why we don't have 7 in front of beans because of these numbers. I'll get to that in just a second, but that has been said a lot throughout the fall. 5th year in a row above trend line yields on beans, same as corn. Illinois was the state that had the largest increase year over year. 76 million more beans in Illinois this year than last year, just as an example. Putting a real quick chart, world soybean stocks, highest ever. World soybean stocks to use, highest ever. And then the U.S. chart's the ugliest one of all, which is how much we have. We have nearly double the amount of ending stocks than we've ever had, which goes back to the 2006 crop. We're nearly double that number. So if you look at beans on paper, they're ugly. They're very ugly. They are making me nervous. I am nervous about beans. The prices that we have seen in the last couple of months, and I'm going to speak in terms of futures price, not necessarily cash, because we'll get to basis in just a second. But we've seen 950, 960 November 19 beans. We've seen 910, 920 March beans. The front month today beans. I think today we closed over 9. I don't exactly remember what it was, 903, 905, something like that. We've been around 920, 928, something like that. We've been in the 920s. The reason that we have put a 9 in front of the spot month and a high 9 in front of the new crop month, in my opinion, is because of the exact point in time we are in the year. We are at that point in time where really every bean available to the world is in the United States. Brazil has no beans. I mean, they've harvested 2 or 3%, so they've just gotten started. But they basically have no beans. They're trying to refill a pipeline that they completely emptied in December. Argentina has no beans. They will not have any beans until May. The Black Sea region doesn't really produce enough beans to matter. China has a small bean crop that they consume all themselves. It makes up about 2% of their entire use of protein. So the world's availability of beans have to come from the United States right now. So even though we are very heavy and we have a really ugly looking chart, if you live anywhere else in the world, you have only one place to go to buy beans, and that's the United States. So I think the opportunity to still sell a bean futures price with a 9 in front of it, whether it's old crop or new crop, is right now. I think the opportunity to wait and sell it in March or April or May is going to be an opportunity to sell it with an 8 in front of it. And I don't even want to rule out if we get to July and August, it might have a 7 in front of it on the cash price when we include basis. So I am not friendly beans. I don't want to come in like the Grim Reaper on beans because beans are tricky. One of the things that scares me about beans more than anything else is how bearish everybody is beans. When everybody's bearish and when everybody thinks beans should be $1 cheaper, that's usually a sign that you're more near the bottom. That's just kind of market psychology. But there's a lot of reasons to be bearish beans, and we are right in front of the major Brazilian harvest. Even though they've had a few issues, they're still going to, when you include Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, South America is still going to harvest more beans than they ever have this year. Argentina had a major issue last year. They were off almost 20 million tons. They're going to be back to a near trendline crop. Brazil might be down 5-7 million tons with some of the drop that they've had in the central part of their country. But if you look at all of South America's production, it's going to be a record. Brazil's not going to be a record, but South America will be. So when we get to the end of harvest in South America for all the major countries down there, we're going to have more beans available to the world than we ever have by 20 million tons, or almost 1 billion bushels. So it's easy to be bearish beans. I want to encourage you as strongly as I can to look in the very near term to get cleaned up on old crop beans. I also want you to look at anything that's north of 950 for new crop as a place to get pretty aggressive selling new crop beans. In our old crop July bean program, we're 100% sold. We went 100% sold in December. In the November for 2 years, the 2-year program that was signed up for last year, we're 60% sold today. Our average price, I think, is around $9.75 or $9.80. It's in that area because we traded in and out of some beans and made a little bit of money early on. If we see, because of this near-term China trade war, the U.S. are buddy-buddy again for the next 18 hours, if we see that continue and beans go back up into this 960 or 970 range, we are very seriously considered pricing all the beans for next crop year. We're that nervous about where beans can go. Bean acres, as we think about bean acres, we just got done talking about an increase of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 million corn acres. The bean acres will probably drop more than that, maybe 7 million. So you can think about it in terms of, well, that would do a lot of good towards our ending stocks if we grow 7 million less acres, and it will help. But if we have a trend line yield on 7 million less acres, we're only going to take out 150 million from that ending stocks number. We're still going to have the second highest ever. We need to have some really severe cuts coming into the next year's bean production number to make a dent into that nearly 1 billion bushel ending stocks number. Short-term price direction. Today's a perfect example for beans. This is how these two guys talked today. So bean prices went higher, and tomorrow it might look like this, and we might be down 15 cents. So that's the world we live in on beans right now. It is very political. I put this in here for just a little bit of humor, but it's obviously not all that funny, but it's true. We haven't seen a political environment as it relates so directly to a commodity like this in such a long time. People can maybe think about the wheat embargoes during the Jimmy Carter administration. There might be a few examples in history, but we haven't had one recently that's affected a single commodity as much as this Chinese-U.S. trade war issue. Bean demand in the world is still quite strong, even though China is slowing down. One of the bigger concerns to me about beans is actually not as much this slide. This slide's ugly, okay? The bigger concern for me on beans today is China slowing down. I do think this trade war is hurting China. I think it's hurting them more than it's hurting us. I do think African swine fever is worse in China than what they're saying it is. And the reasons that I have for giving that opinion is China's imports of beans in November were 40% less than last November. China's imports in December for beans were 40% less than last December. They went 2 months in a row taking 40% less beans. Now, part of that was because they front-loaded with Brazil up to October when Brazil ran out, and had heavy stocks period of time knowing that this issue with the United States was going on. So in December, we see China, roughly 5 million tons were sold to China from the U.S. That gave us a couple of pops in the market. That didn't really do that much for basis, but it did a little bit early. So we had 5 million tons sold. The part that concerns me the most is those boats that were supposed to do it, that are going to China from the United States, were booked for the first half of January, the last half of January, the first half of February, and the last half of February. Usually they're booked in 2-week increments. The Gulf of Mexico today is full of bean barges that haven't been unloaded. We have a lot of barges full of beans waiting on those Chinese boats to show up. We have boats that were supposed to load between January 1st and January 15th. We are already outside of that period, and the Chinese boats haven't loaded yet. That doesn't act like a country that is running out of beans. It doesn't act like a country that just had 2 months in a row where they took 40% less than the previous year for 2 months, that they're scrambling to buy beans. It tells me their demand is suffering. So I'm worried about just how large will the entire Chinese program be for 2019. It's not a matter of how much comes from the U.S. or how much comes from Brazil. It matters how big is that slice of pie to begin with. So I'm really worried about China's ability to get back to 92, 93 million tons of beans. The latest number that come from China, again, I always take those with a grain of salt, was 82 million tons. That would be a huge drop if that's a real number. And that would not be friendly beans. That's actually probably one of the more bearish things for me right now, is that number. China, I get asked all the time, and I don't have any more information than the next guy. How do I think this trade war is going to end? When do I think it's going to end? What effect do I think it will have on prices, especially bean prices? I do believe there will be some agreement made with this trade war. I do believe that there will. I don't know if it will be by March 2nd, but I do believe that we will have one. The reason I think we will have one is because China really needs this trade deal to happen probably more than we do. And when I say we, I mean the United States, maybe not the soybean farmer in the United States, but the United States. And that's because China needs the $650 billion of products that we purchase from them to keep their economy humming the way that it has been for the last 2 decades. We're the one that buys all the crap. So the importance of us to China is very likely 2 or 3 times more important than China is to us. So I think the trade deal does get done eventually. I think when there's something in writing, when there's something that is inked, whenever that is, it's probably worth a little boost to the bean market. Probably worth a little boost to corn and wheat and ethanol, depending on what's in that agreement. But it's also the opportunity to probably sell something. I don't think we're going to go up and up and up for a month because we have this trade thing resolved. We might go up and up for 3 days. That's very likely about the length that thing will happen. So if we see it, it will probably create an opportunity, but grab it is my advice on that. I kind of already talked about this slide. I'll just keep going, how more beans are coming from Brazil versus the U.S. going to China. This is the 40% drop number. This is actually kind of neat information just to take home with you, but this goes back to 2008-9. It shows the imports of beans by China every month since then. And the highlighted numbers are the record for that month. So I just think it's astonishing to me how much China's grown. You go to the bottom left, 2008, 2009, it's only 10 years ago. China took 41 million tons of beans. That's approximately 1.6 to 1.7 billion bushels. Skip ahead to 17, 18, they took 94 million tons of beans. I mean, that's massive growth. The highest month was June of 2008, 2009, 4,700 tons, or 4.7 million tons. You go to 17, 18, or 16, 17, there were months where we were doing close to 10 million tons in a month. So China's importance to beans is significant. And to see this year, the November and December numbers to be approximately 40% below last year, 38% and 40% respectively, it's just decent information.
How comfortable are you with those numbers?
What's that?
How comfortable are you with
these? Are good numbers because these are actual scaled out numbers. These come through. Well, there's a couple different sets that come earlier, and then they're confirmed later by the customs groups. So there's folks called Williams Logistics that does world imports, world export tonnages at all major ports, from everything from steel to crude oil to beans. So these numbers, I believe, because we see those boats on the water. We see the boats getting unloaded. We see the empty boat coming out. That's not like how much corn does China produce. That's a number that I don't believe within a fraction of 30% plus or minus. But those numbers are solid numbers. Yeah, that's actual export data. Good question though. I question everything with China. So I've already, with the question earlier, I spoke a little bit about this on our JSA Select program. I do certainly appreciate URSA and all of URSA's clients, you guys, that have participated in this program so well over the last 5 years. This is year number 6 for this program, and URSA's been in it from day one. So certainly a thank you for that. But to kind of preface this last minute or two, this corn year was a disappointment for us. I'm sure it was a disappointment for you. It was the worst corn year that we've had. If I'm being really nice in the way that I want to say it, I can say that we provided really no value because our average price was essentially the same as the average price in October, and it was maybe 10 cents above where the average price is going to be in January for the winter corn. And you guys don't sign up for this program for us to give you the average price of the delivery period. And I completely understand that. We made this decision in May. I'm going back to this question just a minute. We really felt like the trade war was going to play out mostly in beans. We didn't think it would be as devastating as it was to beans so quickly, and we certainly didn't see the month of June through the first week of July corn dropping 70 cents in 3 weeks because of this trade war either. So our mistake on corn was only being 20% priced. And once we had that drop, corn just didn't move all the way through, and it still really hasn't moved out of the range that it's been in since the middle of June. So we waited and we waited and we waited. And Rogers pointed this out, others have pointed this out. We sold a lot of bushels at the very end of this whole thing because we just waited and waited and waited. We felt like the only hope that we had was something to come out of this trade deal that was positive, and that would give us a boost. And it still really hasn't happened. We've had a few glimmers of it in December for beans, but that's been it. And so we did wait a long time, but really, the waiting or not waiting wouldn't have changed the price. Our bet was made for corn in May, and that was by not selling more than 20% that we did above $4. We spent about 4 weeks or so with the 4 in front of each corn. So on beans, we went 100% sold. The bean performance was quite a bit better. When you look at the performance graphically on the slide there, you can see how corn, the green is our price, the beige is the average futures price of the delivery period. I think those were 6 cents apart, 4 cents apart, essentially the same price. Over the 5 years, certainly the average has been better, but this year was not. When you look at it over a 5-year time frame, this is definitely easier to see on your page in front of you because it's kind of dark up here. This is a monthly corn chart. This black box right here is 60 months. So what I did with this chart was I wanted to show, since the life of the JSA Select program, even before it was even called JSA Select 5 years ago, we call it kind of a generic managed tool program. But you go back 60 months to January 1, 2014, and you run through 2018. The average price of corn for that 5 years was $3.74. If you were to take out, and that's just the math, it says it right up here. Again, the $3.74. Our average price for the fall has been $3.98, I believe, $3.98. The average price for the winter has been $4.15. The average price for the summer has been $4.09. That's the 5-year average of us versus the market. When you look at the lines, the average is in yellow. The JSA average is in white. So that's the longer term look at our program. The point that I really want to make with this and looking at this is really how to direct you in thinking about prices and where they can go and how long they spend some time there. And that's what we're saying in the yellow words. In those 60 months, we've had 13 months in that 60 where the old crop month that we are in right now, the old crop, like right now, it would be the March, May, and July. Those would be the old crop months that we have left. We've only spent 13 out of 60 months with a 4 in front of it. Any 4 at all. 6, I think it's 6, maybe it was 7. 6 of those, I think it's 6 of those months. No, I'm sorry, it's 8, because there's 5 after that. So the first 8 months of 2014 account for 8 out of those 13. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it was 6. But anyway, half of the months in there happened in the first half of 2014. So if you want to say in the last 5.5 years, we've only had 5 or 6 months with a 4 in front of it. 4s are very rare in this 5-year stretch that we've been in. They've been very rare. And when you've had more opportunities to sell them, it's when you're selling the next year's crop. So today, we can sell next year's crop with a 4 in front of it. These 19 close, it was 403. We can sell that 4 today. We can sell these 20 today with a 4 in front of it. That's, I think, around 412-ish. Okay, so you can do that today, but you're selling a crop year out. There's not been that many opportunities. So when I say what I kind of said earlier, we're looking at year 6 in this program as being very, very similar to the last 5. And our approach is when we can see a 4 in front of corn, whether it's a 405 for next crop year or a 415 for 2 crop years out, we're going to be a lot more aggressive than we were, especially this past year, a lot more aggressive to grab that. Not looking and saying, well, we do have the tightest fundamentals we've had in 5 years, because that happened this year, and it didn't pan out. We got too complacent with that information. We want to manage next year thinking it's going to be just like the last 5, then thinking it's going to be something different. So our approach as we go forward is to be more aggressive further out than what we have been looking at these averages. Beans, obviously this year's bean performance was quite a bit better. The last few years have been very much neutral. So, beans are more volatile in performance. We have gotten a lot more aggressive on beans. Being 100% sold for the summer already. Being 60% sold for next fall already. And we've already traded in and out of beans once. We're looking for opportunities to buy back corn on a break that's maybe 15 cents or 20 cents. So we're trying to be a bit more aggressive, hit a few more singles than we have in the past. But in order to do that, we have to get these early sales on first. I can never be long corn in this program. I don't know if you guys have ever thought of that or not. You guys are long. I have to be short as a hedge against those bushels. So that short is what's in versus account as a hedge against their purchase from you. So I can never be long. If I don't have anything sold and we're at the lows of the market, I can't buy that. If I've already got something sold and we're near the lows of the market for the last 12 months, I can buy back what I sold. But I can't ever be long because that's just speculating. It's not hedging. So we're really taking the initiative to do more of that this year. One of the ways that we're also doing that, and I haven't shared this with all of the groups that I've spoken to, I did last night, so I want to here as well. We've made one internal change. For the first 3 years of this program, myself and one other person, his name's Brent Baker, but that, neither here nor there, but he and I managed the pricing decisions of this program for the first 3 years. It was the two of us. As we grew from 7 people that were in the very first program the first year, Ursa was one of those 7. Today we have around 50. As we have grown over the years with this program, we've added a few other partners that are in our company in this, what we'll call a pricing committee. As we continue to add other offices, this year, this current old crop year, we had 7 people on that committee. There were 7 people that were making the decision: do we sell, do we not sell? What do we think? Where do we think prices are going to go? Should we do something with options? We learned in a pretty short amount of time, 7 is way too many people to make pricing decisions. If there's a family operation in the room here that's got 7 brothers and sisters, and you all decided you're all going to be the marketing team, you can imagine perhaps how those discussions would go. A lot of times we did a whole lot of cussing and discussing about where we think the market will go, and then we didn't end up making a decision. So we have gone back to the 2, myself and Brent again, as the focal point for making pricing decisions for this program. That's not going to guarantee better performance. I'm just sharing with you one of the changes that we've made. I'm not trying to say that the reason that we're going to do better next year because that's what happened. I'm just letting you in on a little bit of an internal change that we feel like we need to make, be a little bit more aggressive and doing it in a more streamlined way and make a few more trades. On beans, similar chart, 60 months. The average price of beans for 60 months on the old crop month has been $10.17. If you take away the first, let me see here, the first 7 months of 2014, the average price drops to $9.65. I don't want anybody to think I'm trying to play funny with math. There's one number and it's the exact number. 60 months, the average is $10.17. But if you look at these first 6 months of 2014, that's when we had $14 and $15 beans. So those are obviously affecting the average quite a bit for those 60 months. When I take out those first 6 months, it is an accurate statement to say in the last 4.5 years, the front month average for beans has been $9.65. Our average price for fall has been $10.05, for winter it has been $10.30, and for the summer it has been $10.25. I will be the first to tell you I do not think we will have a 10 in front of beans this next year. I don't think we're going to be given that opportunity. That's why we're already 60% priced at something in the 970s, I think, for new crop. We still have a little bit more to go. If we see a huge drop and we can buy back some, maybe we can get to a 10. But I'm not so sure the market's going to print a 10 this year. Every year since 2006, the market has printed a 10 at some point in time. I don't think it's going to happen this year. Beans are kind of the takeaways. I've already gone through all of these. You guys can read those if you want, but I really believe I've gone through all of those. I do want to encourage you strongly to consider the year 2 option for our program. Our sign-up deadline is the end of the month. We have 7 months to price fall corn and fall beans for this coming fall, the fall of 19. That gives us one weather market, and that gives us one key time frame. We've got to really be aggressive in selling to perform, relatively well. In the 2-year program, we have 19 months. We have 2 weather markets. We have South American weather. We have a whole other harvest that we can buy the lows for, and that's also giving us an extra 12 months of carry to sell. So you guys don't necessarily have to carry hedges and think about a position for 19 months. That's our job. But it does give us a lot more time to make a few more trades. That the intention is to perform a little better than 1 year at a time in that 2-year program. It does give us more room to move. So that's one of the bullet points there, number 2. The rest of the stuff I really already said, so I won't need to read that to you. But that's all I have. Any questions? Thoughts, rebuttals? I mean, there's lots of stuff I didn't cover, but I don't want to be here for 2 hours. I don't think you guys.
Usually you give us a weather, what your weather outlook is.
Weather.
What do you guys have for an outlook?
Yeah, weather, good old weather. I did have a weather slide last year. I have had a weather slide in the last few years that has to do with El Nino, La Nina.
The blob.
The blob, exactly, south of Alaska. Today, that's very neutral. It's not real hot, not real cold, so there's not really a story there. But I'll be honest with you, we've looked at that information over the last 5 years, and I think it's important, but I also don't want that to really influence a marketing decision like maybe we've made it out to be in the last couple of years. Because when last year we talked about how that blob was so warm and then it went away, I think a lot of folks took that to be, okay, this year's weather's going to be different. And rightfully so, that's what history has told us. This year's weather wasn't different. Materially, okay? We had a little bit of a rougher spring. We had some extra rain in July in the northern corner belt. I'm not saying this year's weather was perfect, but we didn't have any major issues. El Nino and La Nina and sea surface temperatures are more an art than a science when it comes to predicting weather. So I'm pulling back a little bit on trying to use that real strongly for marketing decisions because they can change. And even when we think we're onto something, and we really had something last year that showed when the waters south of Alaska, when they get cold, we typically have some hot and dry summers. It never got cold, but it went away from being hot. It went to neutral, and we didn't have a really hot and dry summer. So, and the other thing is, I'm not a meteorologist, so I don't want to portray something that is really maybe a stretch to try to forecast weather that far out based on sea surface temperatures. There's a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of people doing it because of global initiatives to prove that money's being spent. But as it relates to year after year, marketing decisions for corn price, marketing decisions for bean price, I took it out of the presentation this year because I really felt like last year it sent too strong of a signal to wait, and it didn't turn out. That blob didn't turn out. So that's why I didn't put it in there. And right now it's neutral. Right now the sea surface temperatures, we were not in El Nino or La Nina right now, and the blob south of Alaska is neutral. So all the waters of the Pacific are just within 1 degree of normal. And so it's really not giving us much either. But good question. I'd be lying to you. That's probably the second most common question I get versus last year is, hey, where's your weather slides? Because I did leave them out. Any other
I
questions?
should see the pretty wide bean basis this year. What's that trying to tell us? How do we interpret that moving forward? What's that looking like?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Tim, because I kind of forgot to address that, especially on beans. Bean basis this year has already been wider than average. I think the basis today, you're going to have to help me out, Tim. I know it's around 55 under, roughly.
For new crop.
For new crop. And again, I don't want to scare everyone in this room, but if you've never had a billion bushels of bean carry out before, somebody has to carry those beans from old crop to new crop. And in order to do that, that person has to get paid carry. And in order to get paid to carry in the market, that generally needs a wide basis on the front end. And I'm nervous about how many beans are going to get plopped onto the market in July and August this year because time ran out. We could see URSA basis at $1 under in July and August. It absolutely could happen. That's a scary number. I'm not trying to scare everybody in the room, but it can happen. I would be, if I look at these values of 920 or something for the January, March futures right now, and I'm looking at 30 under, 35 under at some of these locations, it's wider than that. It's, what's cash price, Tim, today?
848 nearby. Are you talking new crop?
Nearby.
848.
848. So I'm just going to round it to 850. 850 beans, 875 beans, something in that range. Nearby cash, and if I were to compare that cash price that you can receive for delivering beans to URSA, I know it's cheap. I know it's cheap. In the last 5 years, that's a cheap number. But I don't have a lot of hope that we go materially higher than that all the way through the end of the year. And I'm afraid July and August, with $1 under basis and an 850 August price, you could have a 7 in front of that cash price. I am worried about that. 850 cash beans with $1.60 Trump bucks, that's a 1010. Just take it and say my price was 1010 for the year on the stuff you haven't sold. I call them Trump bucks, whatever you call them. It's got an acronym, M something, 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 name it. I've been asked, do we think we'll get any Trump bucks next year? I wouldn't plan on Trump bucks next year. I don't think so. It is going to be the start of a big election cycle for 2020, and Trump says it himself all the time. I love farmers, so maybe there's another round of Trump bucks, but I don't know. I wouldn't count them. The market's telling you something. The market's telling you to adjust, not maybe just you, but the market's telling the United States to grow less beans next year, and that's it's doing its job. And one of the ways it does its job is to keep basis quite wide on the front end and keep pressure on the front of the basis. Cheapest beans in the world, starting in February all the way through July, is coming from Brazil, not the United States. Their beans are cheaper than ours at this current price. FOB price to a farmer in Mato Grosso, Brazil, right now is $7.50. That's his FOB farm cash feeding price.
Can they make money at that?
Good question. I don't think so.
So they got the same problem we do.
At $7.50, I would agree. Their break even is lower than ours because of land costs, for sure. Their yields are about the same. Their input costs are similar enough that it's kind of split hairs, but it's the land cost that makes a difference. Their break even is probably in the 40 to 50 cent a bushel cheaper break even than ours. So they do have a little bit cheaper break even. But $7.50 is awfully cheap too. So I don't think they're making money there. But you gotta remember what Brazil just went through for the last 5 or 6 months. The Brazil basis for the last 5 or 6 months was $1.50 to $1.80 above our basis. They had an exceptionally high basis because they were the only country in the world that was going to sell China beans for 6 months. If I'm a seller in Brazil, man, it's Christmas. I got the biggest buyer in the world, and they can only buy it from me. Guess what my price is going to do? Okay, so its basis went through the roof. That benefited the Brazilian farmer for the last 6 months. He had a great old crop. I hope he saved some of that money because right now he's getting kind of rough. So I think the bean price range that we're in right now is probably going to be in the upper half of what I think.
Is he where we were 5 years ago? They had good prices and it's just starting to tail off on them.
Maybe I don't know. I mean, you get under $8 cash in central Brazil, you're going to start dipping below some break evens, I think. So.
Do they slow up when? Next year? We need to, do they?
They may. That's a good question. That they may slow up. That would be a change of trend of the last 10 years. They've increased their production every year for several years, at least a decade, on an average of 1 to 2% of acres per year. If the prices get bad enough and rough enough, they will probably not increase. But I think it's way too early to tell that right now. I mean, it's September for them right now. That's a good question to ask. Maybe more in the summer for us, which is their it's their winter time frame when they're kind of doing their assessing of what to plant the next year. So I think we're really 5 or 6 months away from really having a good idea about that. It's possible. It's possible. Okay, thank you for your time.
Any general comments on livestock? Got a lot of livestock.
Yes. Great, Roger. One of the bigger benefactors, potentially, of a trade deal with China does really occur in the livestock sector. Hogs in particular, and I think it's a combination of the trade issue, freeing up some tariff barriers of taking hogs into China, or pork into China. The other thing is the African swine fever. I think African swine fever is worse in China than we think it is, and we are seeing upticks in demand for export pork, not necessarily directly to China, but we're backfilling channels from other people who are selling to China. So our hog numbers are strong. We've had some volatility this week in hogs, don't get me wrong, but I do think it's one of the more bright spots for ag. And I would put cattle just behind hogs. They also have a bright spot. One of the few times we could say in the last 5 or 6 years where you've had a couple consecutive cycles, feeders to fat, where you could have locked in a 270-day margin and then you bought the feeders. That hasn't happened all that much, but it's happened for 2 consecutive cycles, at least on board crush. So cattle margins are better than they've been the last 5 or 6 years. I think I don't see why that has to change right away. I think we can see another cycle of that. So one of the brighter spots in ag right now is, in particular, hogs and cattle. Poultry is pretty flat. It's decent, but it's pretty flat. Hogs and cattle are where the uptick has been. So we remain positive where we have been the last 3 to 4 months on those margins. Yes, sir.
What's your thoughts on wheat markets?
Wheat. I'll give you my 30 seconds on wheat futures price, and this is just something that we have to live with. In the United States, wheat futures price is not determined in the United States. Yes, we have a Chicago Board of Trade wheat futures for soft red, and we have a Kansas City wheat futures for hard red, and we have Minneapolis wheat futures for spring, and all 3 of those have U.S. cities in front of them. But it is not in the United States that determines whether wheat is 450 or 550 or 650. That's determined first in Russia, second in the Ukraine, third in Argentina, and then the United States. And Canada. We put the United States and Canada together a lot of times, especially for hard red and spring. Wheat has a relatively bullish story in the United States right now because of the acres being as low as they are. But the wheat bullishness of this year has been played out in basis, not in futures. Last August, we did see $6 wheat futures. You could have sold July 19 for $6 or higher, 6 to 6.20 range. But the real movement that's happened in wheat has been the Gulf going from 15-20 over to 60 or 70 over, and that's where the bullishness has been. It hasn't been futures price rallies. So I am friendly wheat. I do think we could put a 6 in front of it again, but I'm still. It's still more likely that what we see in wheat prices is going to come from basis more so than futures. Russia carries such a big stick in wheat production that it's going to be hard to just not focus on them and what's going on there when we're trading wheat futures. So my target, I think July wheat got to 5.25, roughly in that range right now for Chicago July wheat. We've been up to 550 a few times. That's kind of been the high end of the range. I think we've got a couple of months here where the U.S. exports are going to be very strong all the way in through April because Russia is more or less out of wheat until their harvest rolls back around. So I do think there's an opportunity in the short term to start to work towards $6 July. I look at July futures for this. I wouldn't wait until then to sell everything. I would sell some along the way, but I do think there's some upside in wheat based on the Australian crop being so small and the Argentine crop being so wet right now. There's a lot of quality problems there. So there's a couple of interesting bullish stories happening on wheat, but that doesn't make me $1 bullish. It's maybe 30 to 50 cents in the next couple of months. All right. Thank you.